My name is Elara Quinn. I was 27 when the night stopped feeling like something I could simply drive through. The rain had been steady for hours, thin at first, then heavier, like the sky was quietly insisting on being heard. My hands rested low on the steering wheel, careful, instinctive. Pregnancy had changed the way I moved through the world. Every turn was slower, every decision softer, or maybe just heavier. The city looked different at night when you were alone long enough. Streetlights stretched into blurred lines across the windshield, and everything felt like it was happening slightly behind glass, distant, untouchable. I remember thinking I should have gone home earlier, but rent didn't wait. Neither did the quiet fear of what it meant to raise a child without certainty. So I stayed. One more ride, I told myself. Just one more. The call came through with a soft chime. Pickup location barely 10 minutes away. No name, just initials. That wasn't unusual. Still, something about the address made me hesitate. It sat on the edge of the industrial district, where buildings stood too far apart and shadows seemed to hold their shape longer than they should. I almost declined. Almost. But then my hand moved before my thoughts could settle, and I accepted. By the time I reached the corner, the rain had softened again. Not stopped, just quieter. Like it was listening. He stepped into the headlights slowly. Not stumbling. Not rushing. Just deliberate. And it wasn't the blood that made my chest tighten. It was how calm he looked standing there, as if whatever had happened to him wasn't the part that mattered anymore. I should have driven away. Instead, I unlocked the door. He didn't say anything when he got in. The door closed with a muted thud, sealing us into a kind of quiet that didn't feel empty. It felt occupied, like something unseen had followed him inside. I kept my eyes forward, both hands steady on the wheel, but I could feel him there in the back seat. Not just his presence, his stillness. Hospital? I asked, my voice softer than I expected. A pause. Not hesitation. More like he was deciding whether the word itself meant anything. Yes. That was all. I glanced at the rearview mirror, just for a second. His face was pale, but not in a fragile way. More like something had drained out of him that wasn't only blood. There was a cut along his temple, dark and uneven, and his shirt. I had to look away before my thoughts could form around it. I started driving. The wipers moved in slow rhythm, back and forth, like a metronome trying to keep time with a moment that refused to settle. I noticed everything then. The sound of rain against metal, the faint scent of iron in the air, the way my own breathing had become too deliberate. You should press something against it, I said quietly, nodding toward the back seat where an old cloth lay folded. He didn't move. It's not as bad as it looks, he replied. And somehow, that made it worse. We drove in silence for a while. The kind that grows, stretches, wraps around your thoughts until you start hearing things that aren't being said. I found myself thinking about my child, about how small they were, how unaware. About the strange responsibility of choosing safety when you don't always recognize danger. Why didn't you call an ambulance? Asked before I could stop myself. This time, he looked up. Our eyes met in the mirror. Just briefly. Because I needed someone who would keep driving, he said. Something in my chest tightened. Not fear. Not exactly. Recognition. I didn't ask anything else after that. But as we turned toward the hospital road, I realized something quietly, almost unwillingly. This wasn't just a ride anymore. And whatever I had just agreed to, it hadn't fully revealed itself yet. The hospital lights appeared slowly through the rain. Soft at first, then clearer, like something pulling us toward a version of safety I wasn't entirely sure we belonged to anymore. I slowed near the entrance, my fingers tightening slightly on the wheel. We're here, I said, though the words felt unnecessary. He didn't move right away. Instead, he leaned forward just enough that I could hear his breath closer now, uneven but controlled. Wait, he said quietly. Something in me resisted, but not outwardly. It stayed inside, folding into itself like a question I didn't know how to ask. I don't need you to come in, he continued. But there's something you should know before I step out of this car. I turned slightly, not fully facing him, just enough to let the silence shift. I wasn't supposed to be in your car tonight, he said. The sentence settled between us, heavier than it sounded. I chose it. That didn't make sense. Or maybe it did in a way I wasn't ready to accept. Why? I asked, my voice almost steady. Another pause. Longer this time. I watched his reflection instead of turning around fully. Something about direct eye contact felt like crossing a line I didn't understand. Because you don't ask the wrong questions, he said. And you don't panic when things feel off. I almost laughed at that, but the sound never came. If anything, I felt exposed. Like he had seen something in me I hadn't even named yet. You don't know me, I replied, quieter now. No, he agreed. But I know patterns. The word lingered. Patterns. And suddenly, without warning, a memory surfaced. Sharp, unwelcome. My mother's voice years ago, telling me I had a habit of stepping into situations I didn't fully understand, not out of recklessness, but something else. Something quieter. A need to hold things together, even when they weren't mine to carry. I blinked, grounding myself back in the present. This isn't my problem, I said, more to myself than to him. I know, he replied. That's why it matters that you still stayed. The rain softened again, tapping lightly against the roof like it was waiting for something to end. He reached for the door handle, then stopped. If anyone asks, he added, you dropped me 2 streets away. My breath caught slightly. That sounds like something I shouldn't agree to. He nodded once. It is. Another pause. And then, quietly, almost gently, which is why I'm asking you to decide carefully. For a moment, everything felt suspended. Time, thought, even fear. Just a single choice sitting there, asking to be seen clearly. I looked at the hospital entrance again, then back at the mirror. I dropped you here, I said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't firm. But it was enough. He studied me for a second, just long enough to acknowledge the weight of what I'd chosen. Then he stepped out into the rain, without another word. The door closed, and just like that, he was gone. But as I sat there, engine still running, something deep and quiet inside me shifted. Because I knew this wasn't where it ended. I drove away before I could change my mind. The hospital lights faded behind me, swallowed by the rain and distance, but the quiet he left behind didn't go with them. It stayed, settling into the empty back seat, lingering in the space between my thoughts. I told myself it was over. Just another night. Just another passenger. But my hands didn't feel the same on the wheel anymore. When I got home, the hallway light flickered the way it always did, slow and tired. I remember pausing at the door longer than usual, keys still in my hand, listening to nothing in particular, as if the silence might tell me something if I gave it enough time. Inside, everything was exactly where I had left it. The small folded blanket on the couch. A glass of water untouched on the table. The ordinary stillness of a life trying to hold itself together. I should have gone straight to bed. Instead, I sat down and stared at my phone. No notifications. No missed calls. Still, I opened the ride app. The trip was already marked as completed. Nothing unusual, except for one thing. The pickup location had changed. I blinked, refreshing the screen, thinking maybe it was a glitch. But it stayed the same. The address I had driven to earlier wasn't the one showing anymore. This one was different, closer to the city center. Cleaner. Safer. That didn't make sense. I knew where I had gone. I remembered the broken streetlight, the empty lot across the road, the feeling of being slightly out of place. So, why had it shifted? A quiet unease settled in my chest, not sharp, not panicked, just persistent. I clicked into the trip details again, slower this time. That's when I noticed it. A note. Drivers rarely received notes after a completed ride. And when they did, it was usually something simple. A thank you. A complaint. Nothing that stayed with you. This wasn't that. There were no words. Just a file attachment. I hesitated before opening it, my thumb hovering over the screen longer than it should have. A strange thought crossed my mind. Once I looked at it, something would change. Not around me, maybe, but inside. Still, I tapped. The file loaded slowly, like it wasn't meant to be rushed. And when it finally opened, I felt my breath catch, Not because I understood it immediately, but because I didn't. It was a document. Scanned. Slightly faded at the edges. At first glance, it looked official, structured, stamped. But something about it felt personal. I zoomed in. And that's when I saw the name. Not his. Mine. Elara Quinn. Printed clearly across the top, like it had always belonged there. My fingers went cold. I hadn't shared my full name with him. Not tonight. Not ever. The room felt smaller suddenly, quieter in a way that wasn't comforting anymore. I read the first line slowly, my mind trying to keep up with what my eyes were seeing. Subject: Observational record, Phase 1 complete. I didn't understand what it meant, but I understood one thing, with unsettling clarity. That man hadn't just chosen my car. He had chosen me, and whatever I had stepped into, it had already been waiting. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid, at least not in the way fear usually feels. It was quieter than that. More deliberate. Like my mind had decided it wasn't done processing something important. I sat at the small kitchen table, the document still open on my phone, its glow the only light in the room. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The silence it left behind felt almost too clean, like something had been washed away that I hadn't agreed to lose. I read the file again. And again. Each time slower. Observational record, Phase 1 complete. The words didn't explain themselves. They just existed, flat, certain, indifferent to how I felt about them. Below the heading, there were fragments. Dates. Times. Notes that felt clinical, detached. But they weren't random. They followed a pattern. My pattern. Work hours. Routes I preferred. The nights I chose to stay out longer, and the ones I didn't. Even small things, like how often I paused before accepting a ride request late at night. My chest tightened, not from panic, but from recognition. This wasn't recent. This had been happening for a while. I leaned back slightly, one hand resting over my stomach without thinking. A quiet instinct. Protective. Grounding. Okay, I whispered to no one, because saying it out loud made it feel more real. There was a date near the bottom of the page. Yesterday. And next to it, a single line that felt different from the others. Less observational. More intentional. Subject demonstrates consistent ethical restraint under pressure. I stared at that sentence longer than I should have. It didn't feel like a compliment. It felt like a conclusion. A soft creak pulled me out of my thoughts. The building settling, maybe, or a neighbor moving upstairs. Normally, I wouldn't have noticed. Tonight, everything felt sharper. More defined. I locked my phone and sat there for a moment, letting the quiet return. Then, slowly, I unlocked it again. There had to be more. I scrolled. The document ended abruptly, like it wasn't meant to answer questions, only to confirm them. But at the very bottom, just before the file closed, there was something else. A timestamp. Future dated. Tomorrow. And beneath it one short line. Phase 2, direct contact. My breath stilled, not from shock, but from something deeper. A realization forming slowly, carefully. This wasn't about the man in my car. It wasn't even about what had already happened. It was about what came next. And somehow, I had already been included in that decision. Morning didn't feel like morning. The light that filtered through the curtains was pale, uncertain, like it wasn't fully committed to being there. I sat at the edge of my bed for a long time, hands resting on my knees, the quiet of the apartment pressing gently around me. Phase 2, direct contact. The words hadn't left me. They followed me into waking, into movement, into the small routines that usually grounded me. Brushing my hair. Pouring water into a glass. Folding the same blanket I had unfolded the night before. Everything looked the same. But nothing felt untouched anymore. I thought about ignoring it. Pretending the document was some elaborate mistake, a glitch, something meant for someone else. That would have been easier. Cleaner. But it wouldn't have been true. Because somewhere, beneath the confusion, there was a quieter recognition. He had said he knew patterns. And now, I couldn't unsee how carefully mine had been observed. By midday, I found myself back in the car. Not because I needed to work. I told myself that at least But sitting still hadn't given me any answers. It had only made the silence louder. The city moved as it always did. People crossing streets, shops opening, conversations blending into a distant hum. Ordinary life continuing, unaware of the small shift that had taken place inside mine. I kept driving. No destination. Just movement. It was sometime in the early afternoon when the notification came through. Not from the ride app. From an unknown number. I didn't open it right away. My fingers tightened slightly around the phone, a quiet hesitation settling in. Then, slowly I tapped. The message was simple. No greeting. No explanation. Just an address. And below it, a time. 6 p.m. I stared at the screen, my mind searching for something, anything, that would make this feel less intentional, less precise. But there was nothing random about it. I checked the document again, almost instinctively. Phase 2, direct contact. This was it. The moment that line had been pointing toward. I exhaled slowly, my hand drifting once more to my stomach. A grounding habit I hadn't even realized I'd formed. This wasn't just about curiosity anymore. There was risk in going. But there was also risk in not understanding what had already begun. By the time the clock moved closer to 6, I had already made the decision, though I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment it became final. The address led to a quiet part of the city. Not isolated, but deliberately unnoticed. The kind of place you wouldn't remember unless you had a reason to. I parked across the street, sat there for a moment, watched the building. Nothing unusual. No movement. No sign that anything inside was waiting. And yet, I knew it was. I stepped out of the car, the evening air cooler than I expected. Each step toward the entrance felt measured, not rushed. Like I was walking into something that had already been decided long before I arrived. The door was slightly open. Not wide. Just enough. I paused at the threshold, my hand hovering near the edge of it. Then, quietly, I pushed it open and stepped inside. The building wasn't what I expected. No dramatic lighting. No visible security. No obvious reason for the weight in my chest. It looked almost ordinary. An old converted office space, the kind that had once been functional and now felt like it was waiting for permission to matter again. But the silence inside wasn't ordinary. It was controlled. I took a slow step forward. The floor creaked softly beneath me, and the sound felt too loud in a place like this. The air smelled faintly of paper and something metallic, like old machinery that had been recently used, then carefully hidden again. "Hello," I said quietly. My voice didn't echo. It just disappeared. That alone made my throat tighten slightly. A door at the end of the hallway was already open. Not wide, just enough to suggest intention rather than invitation. I walked toward it. Each step felt like a decision I was making twice, once in my body and once in my mind trying to catch up. When I reached the doorway, I stopped. Inside was a small room. A desk. A chair. A single lamp turned on, casting a warm circle of light over an otherwise empty space. And then I saw him. Not in the way I had seen him before. Injured, silent, distant. This time he was composed. Clean shirt. No visible blood. No urgency. Just stillness. As if he had been waiting for a long time without needing to prove it. He looked up at me. Not surprised. That mattered more than I wanted it to. "You came," he said simply. It wasn't relief in his voice. It wasn't triumph either. Just confirmation. I didn't move closer yet. "You left me a document," I said carefully. "With my name on it." A faint pause. Yes. That single word should have come with explanation. Instead, it felt like he was acknowledging something already agreed upon. I stepped further inside, stopping just outside the light. "What is this?" I asked. He studied me for a moment, not in a way that felt invasive but precise. Like someone checking whether a fragile structure would hold under pressure. "An assessment," he said finally. My jaw tightened slightly. "Of me?" "Yes." The honesty should have been comforting. It wasn't. It made everything sharper. "I'm not part of whatever this is," I said, though my voice didn't carry the certainty I wanted it to. He tilted his head slightly, as if considering that statement without rejecting it outright. That's what most people say before they realize they already are. A silence stretched between us. Not empty, structured. I noticed things in it I hadn't before. The placement of the chair. The folder on the desk. The faint glow of a second screen turned away from me, as if what it displayed wasn't meant for direct viewing yet. I drove a stranger to a hospital, I said quietly. That doesn't make me part of anything. His expression softened, not emotionally, but almost analytically. No, he agreed. It doesn't. That pause again. Then carefully. But staying did. The words landed differently than I expected. Because he wasn't talking about the hospital anymore. He was talking about every decision after that. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was revealing. I looked at the folder on his desk, my attention drawn to it like it had its own gravity. What is phase 2? I asked. For the first time since I walked in, his gaze shifted slightly, less observational, more present. Truth, he said. One word. But somehow, it didn't feel like an answer. It felt like the beginning of something I hadn't agreed to understand yet. I should have turned around. That thought came to me not as panic, but as clarity. Quiet, delayed, almost gentle. Like my mind was finally catching up to a decision my body had already made. The room didn't change. The light didn't shift. He didn't move closer. And yet, everything felt different now. Truth, I repeated softly, testing the word like it might reveal its meaning if I held it long enough. He nodded once. Not encouraging me. Not stopping me either. Just acknowledging that I was finally standing at the point where pretending would no longer help. I exhaled slowly and looked at the folder again. My name still sat on it, clean and precise, as if it had always belonged there more than I had. What kind of truth requires observation files? I asked. A faint pause. Not hesitation, calculation. There are people, he said carefully, who move through systems without being seen clearly. Not because they are hidden, but because no one takes the time to understand them. I didn't respond right away. Something in his tone wasn't threatening. It wasn't manipulative either. It was something harder to categorize, detached but not unfeeling. You've been watching me? I said. Yes. The honesty again. Still no apology. No justification offered without being asked for. I looked down for a moment, gathering myself. And phase 2. He shifted slightly in his chair, the first real movement since I entered. Direct contact isn't about control, he said. It's about confirmation. The system doesn't move forward based on assumptions. I let out a short, quiet breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. So I'm what? A subject? A test? His gaze held mine steadily now. No, he said. A variable. That word stayed in the air longer than I expected. Variable. Not object. Not target. Something that changes outcomes. My hand rested again over my stomach without me thinking about it. A familiar instinct returning, protective, grounding, real. You don't get to decide that about me, I said quietly. For the first time, something subtle shifted in his expression. Not surprise. Recognition of resistance. I'm not deciding it, he replied. I'm recording it. Silence followed. But it wasn't empty anymore. It felt like I was standing inside the space where understanding and refusal overlapped, where neither fully won. I looked at the door behind me, then back at him. I don't know what you think you've found, I said, slower now, more controlled. But I'm not part of anything that removes my choice. A pause. Longer this time. Then he spoke, softer than before. That's why you were chosen. The sentence didn't land like a trap. It landed like a mirror I hadn't wanted to look into. I stayed still, breathing slowly, letting the weight of it settle without letting it define me. Outside, somewhere far beyond the walls of the room, life continued, cars, voices, ordinary time moving forward without interruption. But here, something had concluded, and something else had quietly begun. Not a punishment, not a rescue. Just a shift I couldn't undo by pretending I hadn't seen it. I stepped back slightly toward the door. Not in fear. In choice. He didn't stop me. Didn't follow. Just watched, like whatever happened next wasn't his decision anymore. I reached the threshold and paused one last time. "I don't belong to your system," I said. A beat of silence. Then calmly, "I know," he replied. And for the first time, it sounded like he meant it. I stepped out into the corridor, the air outside feeling sharper, real again in a way the room hadn't allowed. Behind me, the door remained open, not closing me in, not holding me back, just waiting. And as I walked away, I finally understood something quietly unsettling. Some encounters aren't about being trapped. They're about being seen. And once you are, nothing about you stays the same again. What began as a simple night shift never truly stayed simple. Elara Quinn didn't walk into danger, nor did she walk into safety. She walked into awareness. And sometimes, that is the most irreversible journey of all. Not every truth arrives loudly. Some come quietly, disguised as choices we think we can undo. But once seen clearly, they change the way we move through every silence afterward. And perhaps the most unsettling part is not what was revealed, but the realization that being observed was never the end of the story. It was only the beginning of understanding how deeply life can study us back. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to reflect on it, because some narratives aren't just meant to be watched, but felt. Subscribe for more cinematic, emotionally charged stories that explore hidden truths, human psychology, and the quiet turning points that change everything. And tell me in the comments, would you have walked into that room or turned away at the door?